We will be starting in just a few seconds. Alderwoman Evans. Alderwoman Evans, we are ready to start.
Oh, great. I was looking for the mayor. Sorry. I'm sorry, but he's on a call.
All right, for those of you who have been with us for the last few hours, you'll know that this session is starting just a little bit differently than the other two. The mayor had to step out for a governor's phone call with area mayors, and so I will start us, and he will be joining us very briefly. So we want to welcome Mr. Shawn Henessee. He is candidate number 3 to join us today. Mr. Henessee was a former county manager in Clark County. He has a number of degrees that we're going to let him share more information about that with us. So Mr. Henessee, what we'll do is kind of take questions in a round robin format. We have approximately an hour. We have about 17 questions, and we'll give you an opportunity at the end to be able to ask any questions of us as well. And we've kind of been going in different directions. We're going to start with Alderman Pittner with question number 1.
Thank you, Lisa. And welcome, Shawn. Thank you for showing your interest in becoming the next city manager for Minot. We have your background materials in front of us, but would you begin by telling us why this position in particular fits your career path?
So I have a lot of experience, over 20 years of local city and county government experience. And when I look at Minot, what I see is a lot of different possibilities. It's something that I think fits nicely with the skill sets that I've developed over those 20 years, particularly my legal background. The lobbying experience I had before I got into local government, I believe would allow me to very effectively represent Minot. I also have a background and experience as a flood zone administrator, which I think is going to be critical in the future for Minot. So when I saw this opportunity, and particularly in the job listing, some of the things that the council was really looking for this city manager to address, it was very nice to see such a complementary set to the background and experience I had. So that's why I see nothing but enormous possibilities for Minot. Minot has grown enormously in the past. I think it will continue to grow in the future. It has a unique combination of having both a strong educational base, a strong agricultural base, a commercial base, and it really is a regional hub. You add into that the Air Force, and all I see is those possibilities, and I'm very excited at the prospect of being able to be a part of that process as Minot continues to grow and expand for all of the residents.
Okay. Mr. Henessee, good morning. Welcome to Minot. Good to have you with us. You've had the opportunity now to kind of learn about our community a little bit and study some materials, and I think you've taken a little touring maybe this morning already. Give us some of your candid impressions.
I got this similar question in one of the earlier groups. My impressions are, like I said, it basically is confirmation of what I knew even before I first came to Minot. The city has grown enormously in the past. It will continue in the future. And I think that not only does Minot have those factors that I talked about earlier, but it also has a vibrant arts community. Really, Minot is also some of the Scandinavian architecture it's known for. And I think that in many ways, the flood continues to influence much of Minot. That's one of the longest term challenges that Minot faces, is really making sure that some of these long-term programs to address some of the flooding that's occurred in the past don't in the future, or at least we're able to mitigate it as much as possible. And so that's one of the long-term challenges, but all I see is so many of the other possibilities there. And that was one of the number one things from my impression, even of driving around by myself, as well as on the tour that I took earlier today. The city has rebounded a lot from the 2011 impact. It's still being felt right now. I know there's many of the first phase construction projects have been completed, but it's looking out to 2034 before, under the current fiscal year 2034, before really the end of that really $1 billion plus project is really completed and undertaken. So a lot of reinforcement of things that I knew before, but also seeing the progress that Minot has made in addressing the flooding issue, and also just the strengths that Minot possesses. Those are some of my number one impressions from being in the city.
Thank you.
Good morning, Shawn. Welcome to Minot.
Thank you.
What organizations are you currently involved with in your community or organization? And in what other ways are you visible in your current community or organization?
Could you speak up just a little? I can't quite hear you.
What organizations are you currently involved in with your community or organization? And what other ways are you visible in your current community or organization?
So I've been an active participant in a number of different organizations in Clark County. There is, I had a background experience in the local Chamber of Commerce. I work for the Chamber of Commerce in Kansas City. I've tried to work closely with the business community. Actually, I was reached out by one person who lived in Clark County who used to live in the Kansas City region. So I've been very active with that organization. I've also been very active. I have a number of other hobbies, such as repairing old cars and book collecting and reading. So that's allowed me to have a lot of experience with a lot of disparate groups within Clark County. I think it's very important for any city manager to really get out, as I told the group earlier today, to really get out of the bubble that all too often exists, because the emails are always coming in, the phone calls are always there, and so you can very easily get chained to your office, but you've got to get out in the community as much as possible. You've got to get out in the departments as much as possible and spend as much time out there. The way that I do that is to try to be as active in as many different groups, setting up times, going out to meet as many different groups as possible to get their input, to get their thoughts, to hear their concerns. And so that can range from, going to many events. It really runs the gamut, and I try very hard to ensure that I'm out in the community as much as possible and getting that feedback, because I think it is so important for a city manager to get that feedback, not only from the council and from the employees and the department heads, but from the residents. That's where you learn a lot, because in this kind of a position, no matter how much experience you have, you're always learning something new. And so that has been and would continue to be my approach.
Okay. Oh, me. What have you done in your career to enhance transparency with respect to local government operations and community stakeholders?
Several different things. One of the things, I worked at Jackson County, Missouri, overseeing several departments. I was there for 13 years. Jackson County is a very large county. It's largely the city of Kansas City. And one of the departments I oversaw, and one of the primary departments, was the Recorder of Deeds. One of the things that I did there, it was really one of the first things that had ever been done for a Recorder of Deeds, was we opened up all of our documents that we recorded were public documents, with the exception of DD 214s, which were restricted. But all the other documents were public documents. So in the interest of transparency, we made all those documents available because they already were public documents. And that was very beneficial for the title companies, other people who needed copies of their marriage license or otherwise to be able to access those records at any time. And we did it free of charge. It was a little controversial for two reasons. One, because you didn't get the revenue which you were allowed by state statute to charge. But I did the calculations, and with the staffing that was needed to produce those paper copies, we were paying much more to produce those paper copies than allow people to access them through the web. I was aware of the, I think, legitimate concerns about potential in the 70s and 80s, more personal information was put on documents that shouldn't have been, such as social security numbers, credit cards. So I actually drafted the legislation and was able to get it passed, which would allow for the redaction of that information, which was improperly put on documents. So that's just one example, but I think that, you know, the fact that we're in an open discussion about this is a testimony to the transparency in the city, and I think that is a very good thing. I think that, you know, obviously, except with the exceptions of personnel issues or legal questions or other things where you have to, transparency is by far the best approach. And and that is certainly my approach, and I would continue to take that approach. Thanks.
So describe an experience collaborating with community or other partners in service delivery, and what are the keys to successful partnerships?
A little bit of background first, I think, would be helpful for this answer, first of all. So Clark County is a very large county that has a very large population outside of incorporated areas. There's well over 200,000 people that live in the unincorporated areas of Clark County, so it's more like a city than a county in many ways. The city of Vancouver is about 180,000 people. When I first came to Clark County, there was a long history of animosity, is the only way to describe it, between the city and the county. The city had annexed large areas of the county. The counties don't annex. What I told everyone from the beginning, because what I really wanted to focus on two things was trying to address a long systemic structural deficit in the general fund and reestablish the relationship both with the city of Vancouver and with the Cowlitz Indian tribe. The Cowlitz Indian tribe had been in litigation for the county for a very long time over their efforts to build a casino, a very expensive casino there. So what I did was really work to repair both of those relationships, and I was able to do that successfully. We didn't always agree with the city of Vancouver, and as I told them, I think it's important that we get to the point where we agree to disagree, but we need to work together as much as we can in as many areas as we can. And I think that we were able to do that. An example, was able to, the county, through a long process, had ended up with ownership of a former landfill. A large segment of this landfill had never been used as a landfill and is currently zoned as industrial. The city of Vancouver very strongly needed a new public works facility, and industrially zoned land is very difficult to get in Clark County in Washington. So was able to work with them and to get an agreement to sell that segment of the landfill that hadn't been used to the city of Vancouver for, it was actually at market rate, but it helped them out enormously because it would allow them to build a new public works facility. Whereas in the past, it had been an extremely competitive situation. With the Cowlitz Indian tribe, really, it was setting the tone. I was able to get an agreement with them, and we on several different areas. As a sovereign nation, you know, the $1 billion that they had invested in their casino was not a taxable item that the county would receive something from. And but they agreed, and we developed a relationship whereby, because the county was still having to pay for, you know, some costs, additional road, prosecutor services or others which were used. So we're able to come to an agreement where the tribe would pay for that. It benefited them because they were continuing to get the services, whereas the county was getting some of the revenue back for some of the expenses they had spent. How do you develop that? It's much like with any relationship. It doesn't matter if it's a work relationship or a personal relationship. It really starts with open communication and developing trust. Trust is a finite item that can be lost very easily. It is something which you are constantly having to work on. And again, this applies. It doesn't matter if it's a personal relationship, a business relationship, or any kind of relationship. That's what I really try to focus on, is having those open lines of communication, developing that trust, and encouraging discussion. This may be because of some of my legal background and experience, but I think it's very important to encourage that discussion. I encourage people to disagree. Nodding heads when you're in a meeting are good, but after a while it can be a little scary to me, because sometimes I'll just say, okay, please, somebody disagree with me. What are we missing here? And that, again, is the way that you learn. I'm always learning something new. As I've told people before, every time you go to a different organization, I've spent 20 years in local government, there's always some different facet or unique aspect to it. Clark County owned a railroad, which I've never known of a county to own a railroad. Marinette County in Wisconsin owned an airport in another state, which was bizarre. They also had a fund called the Dog Bite Fund, which was another bizarre aspect to it. Every organization has its unique facets and aspects. So you're constantly going to be learning that. The most important thing also in any organization, as I told the group earlier today, is really the people. They're your most important asset. But they're also one of the most complex things to figure out. Figuring out those personalities, how you develop those lines of communication, how you develop that trust, and how that ties in with the personalities is, I think, one of the key components for any city manager or anyone in any position, kind of equivalent position.
Thank you.
Hi, and welcome to Minot. I'm
Thank you.
Steve Hopperville. I'm one of the aldermen here. And the question I have for you is, can you describe your overall leadership style and approach to management?
Much like I told the group earlier today, I believe I'm fundamentally here to encourage and support both the department heads and the employees. I am not a micromanager. I believe my primary responsibility in that regards is to support and encourage department heads as well as regular employees. How do you do that? By having those open lines of communication, by allowing people feel free to express themselves, and by spending as much time as you can in those departments. I think it's very important for a city manager to spend time not only outside in the community getting that input, but spending time in departments, not just doing what I call a meet and greet. So I always try to spend full days in departments on multiple occasions. That's the way I learn. That's the way I learn about the personalities. How do they work together? How do they not work together? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What are their concerns? And the only way you really can learn that is to actually spend time in the departments. Yes, when the city manager first shows up to an apartment, sometimes it causes some consternation. But by the end of the day, they understand that you're not there to criticize or to overlook them. You're there just to learn, and make it clear that you're there to learn from them. And it helps to establish that tone, which I think is very important in any position, and it is here as much as it is anywhere else.
Okay, number 7, how would you go about building a cohesive team and ensure that you are collaborating with department directors and getting the best from them?
You first of all have to take all the things that I've been talking about in the earlier questions to develop a cohesive team. You have to also start planning for the future. One of the issues that many local governments are facing is an upcoming potential wave of retirements. So you have to start planning for that. One of the other things that I did to try to build a cohesive team when I was at Jackson County was able to develop a program to again, a little bit of background. What would happen is I would hire an employee, train them for 6 to 9 months, then the title companies would take them and pay them at a higher wage. You're somewhat constrained in what you can do in regards to the salary, but I wanted to demonstrate to the employees the importance of them and how much I wanted to be able to retain them. So I initiated a program for a tuition reimbursement. And it was a little controversial because I heard from people saying, well, they'll just, have us pay for their education and they'll leave. And in some cases they did, but it demonstrates to them that because again, you're tied on the salaries, but it demonstrated to them the importance that you view the employees and how much you want them to succeed. You're setting that tone. You're giving them an opportunity to further themselves, but you're helping your department at the same time, as well as the residents and everyone else you're representing, so that they can learn new skill sets or otherwise. So I think to build a cohesive team, you have to lead by example. It's not, do as I say. It has to be leading by example. You live in a fishbowl all the time in this kind of a position. And that's an inherent nature of the beast with this. And so you have to always understand that you're setting that example to people, and you're setting the tone for the organization. And if you want to really encourage them and build that team, you need to constantly focus on that and work on that.
Could you describe for us how you would communicate and engage employees across all segments of the organization around the vision and mission and goals of the city of Minot?
The communication is always one of those facets that you have to look at on multiple layers. So communications with your elected body, communications with your employees. It really varies. I think it's important to sit down. Like I said, in addition to spending time in the departments, I think it's important to sit down with department heads one-on-one to give them an opportunity to educate you as the city manager about their concerns or their hopes and their goals and their aspirations. It's also important to have group meetings with them also. It helps enormously to tie all these different pieces together, understanding the personalities, understanding the communication preferences, understanding what the goals of the individual department heads and others are, and then trying to synthesize essentially all those different facets into one approach. It's difficult if you're even missing one of those components to the overall end objective, because in the end, the objective is really to be able to make a significant improvement in the lives not only of obviously the city employees, but also the residents for the area. And I think that all of those facets have to be brought together. And if you're lacking any one of those areas, it makes it exponentially more difficult. Communication is obviously huge, and it's something that I think is, I've been doing this for a number of years. I'm still learning things about it, about how to communicate. But I think that it's important to try to have a span of communication which is as effective as possible across a broad range of people and employees as possible.
Describe a situation when the governing body has not taken your recommendation. How did you handle it, and what would you have done differently?
The most recent example I can think of is as Clark County manager, I had to present a recommended budget, and because of a long-term systematic structural deficit, I had a request from one of the other county elected officials for some additional general fund positions. I wasn't able to support that in the recommended budget because I was really focused on that structural deficit. Remember, I talked about the relationship with the city of Vancouver and the Cowlitz Indian tribe. The other thing that I really tried to focus on in Clark County was addressing a structural deficit in the general fund, which had been and is still existent to this day. As such, I had to say no many times. But in this request, I did not recommend these positions. The other elected official went to the council and the council agreed to support funding these positions. And what I did was to really try to closely work with the council and that elected official to find a way to pay for these additional positions. I certainly didn't take it personally. I think that, as I stated very clearly at the time, if we continue to spend general fund money, we are just digging a deeper hole we won't be able to get out of. But I certainly recognize the council's viewpoint that this is more important, and I worked very diligently to go forward to be able to find that money in the budget to be able to pay for those positions. That's an inherent nature of any kind of a budget. A budget is a synthesis of all these different disparate goals and objectives. And as far as anything I would have done differently, in this case, I mean, it would have been easier for me to, if I thought it was going to be passed, to agree to fund these positions. But I thought it was important to establish those parameters. So I wouldn't have, even if I'd known that the council was going to not take my recommendation, because I believe it's very important that with a recommended budget, it be what you actually feel, not what you think will be passed. And but I certainly understand that there's different perspectives on that. And like I said in one of my earlier questions, I welcome that discussion. I think it's important to present contrary opinions. And in that case, my recommendation wasn't adopted, but I worked diligently to see that it was implemented as the budget was amended.
And before you
Oh,
just
sure.
ask your question, just wanted to say that we're about halfway through. It's time-wise, and we're more than halfway through the question, so pacing is going well. So go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks. What methods do you use to communicate with the city council and keeping everyone informed?
It varies is the very short answer. When in another life, when I was in the legal field, there was a much more of a preference for rather detailed memos. That's not something that I found that most department heads or elected officials want to wade through very detailed memos or reading. What I think is important is understanding those communication preferences, not only for the elected officials, for the department heads and the employees. I find it, again, much like with the department heads, it's effective to meet, obviously subject to any public meetings law, but to meet one-on-one with the elected officials to go over any questions they may have, to see about providing additional information, and also, much like with the department heads and the employees, to hear their concerns and their goals and their aspirations. What you're trying to do as a city manager is to take all these disparate viewpoints, all these disparate inputs in terms of budget, in terms of policies, and to present something which is a synthesis of all those different pieces. And the way that you're going to be able to do that is to figure out not only the personalities, but also the communication preferences. What's the best way to convey that information? That is largely subject to what is most conducive to the individual elected official. I'm very comfortable with oral briefings. I'm comfortable with writing a memo. I'm comfortable with PowerPoint presentations. It is situationally dependent, but I'm very comfortable with the wide variety of ways. That's why, again, I think, particularly in the first year, there will still be a very steep learning curve for me no matter what. And I think it's important to try to take all of those factors, and communication is obviously one of them, and trying to figure out what is the most effective means for the council, and then crafting something that suits those needs.
We welcome our mayor back in. We'll go on to the next question. The Minot Air Force Base and Minot State University are an important part of our community and our economy. So describe your experience in this area, or how would you approach these relationships?
So one example, while the organizations I've worked for have not had a large Air Force base next to them. I grew up next to McConnell Air Force Base in Wichita. Sometimes it wasn't always the best thing when the KC-135s took off late at night, but you learn to adapt with that. I think that Minot is a critical component for the success of Minot. I think that in Clark County, while it's not an air base, we had a very, very large military facility called Camp Bonneville, which had closed. And it was generously donated by the Army. The difficulty was it was used for 80 years for ordnance training. And so there was a lot of unexploded ordnance there. However, the Army did agree to fund the cleanup effort, which has been going on for a very, very long time. Because you have to be very, very cautious. It's a beautiful area. And so the Army did agree to pay for that ordnance cleanup. We've actually were able to get the vast majority of it cleaned up. There's some areas, what they call the central target impact zone, which no one will ever go on to. But we're able to open up many of the other areas. And so have a lot of experience of dealing with that aspect of it from a large military organization. In terms of Minot State, I think that that's, again, one of the strengths, as I alluded to earlier in regards to the strengths of Minot, is having that organization. When I was in Marinette County, we had the university well, it was Green Bay. It was actually changed, the local community college. An important asset, huge, I think, in any kind of organization. And I think, again, it's one of those key pillars which has allowed Minot to be so successful. I graduated from Wichita State University. In Clark County, it was WSU, but it was Washington State University. Worked closely with them. Their facilities were located, again, in the unincorporated areas. They had a lot of concerns with some of their expansions and their proposed developments, getting the permit approvals and whatnot. So both the air base as well as Minot State, or any kind of educational facility, I think, are one of those ingredients which have allowed Minot to grow so successfully and be so successful. And I think it's critical to support them, to have that open dialogue. I think it's important, if I were to be selected, to really take the time to go out and meet and spend time with all these different organizations, all the local mayors, the spend time at the base, spend time at the universities. It's much like what you're trying to do to learn the personalities of the elected officials. You're trying to learn the personalities of the department heads and the employees, but you also have to get out and meet the people, but you also have to get out and meet the people in the other organizations. Because again, you have to avoid that bubble. Again, the emails pile up. I mean, but you've got to get out of the office and you've got to get out of the bubble.
Thank you.
Good morning. Actually, good afternoon then. I do apologize for having to step away, but I will absolutely go back and watch all of the respondents to make sure that I'm getting the same experience as everyone else here. So thank you so much. I do apologize again for my absence for a brief moment. For the number 12, is that where we're at?
Yes.
Thank you. If you can describe your experience in developing a strategy and direction for an organization, and how do you ensure the projects and priorities of the governing body are implemented?
So a longer term strategy, I worked at a firm that really specialized in comprehensive plans, strategic plans, long-term plans. So I had a lot of experience with that. A comprehensive plan is something that in much the way that when I was talking about this issue with the earlier group, I was going to say dozens, and I'm like, no, that's way too low a number. I've probably dealt with greater than 50 comprehensive plans or strategic plans, because really I was able to work across the United States and even somewhat overseas on those. And those plans are a manifestation of the goals and intents for the longer term of the community, both the strategic plan as well as a comprehensive plan. There is a difference between them, but nobody is going to be able to stay awake if I go into an hour-long diatribe about that. I've spent a lot of time on those plans. One of the things that I've learned to always emphasize in those longer-term goals and objectives is goals are important, but in the end, what is really important is the strategies for achieving them. All too often, I've seen comprehensive plans, strategic plans, which have what I call the baseball, apple pie, and motherhood goals, which are good. We look for Minot to be a thriving community, which provides adequately for citizens, things that no one is going to oppose. And I think that those are good goals. But the much harder question, and I think the much more important question, is how are you going to achieve that? And that is one thing that I think is very important that is included in any kind of strategic plan or comprehensive plan, because that then allows you to achieve those long-term goals, because you're laying out the way you're going to actually achieve them rather than just establishing goals without having any way of achieving them. So that is complementary to making sure that you're going to be able to achieve those goals. I think it's also important that much as you're trying to synthesize all this information, it doesn't matter if it's a budget, if it's personalities, if it's different approaches. In the end, what you're trying to do is to present the synthesization of all of these different aspects. A long-term goal is also that. And so what I believe is it's important to establish those goals, to have a strategy for achieving them, and then clearly outlining that in the longer term.
And if I could just follow up a little bit on that in terms of ensuring the projects and priorities of the governing body are implemented, can you maybe relate that a little bit to plan to not only from the management, but staff and implementation?
Sure. I think that, one manifestation of that is the budget. I think that, any kind of recommended budget, I need to take a drink of water here in a second. Any kind of recommended budget needs to include those goals and priorities for the elected officials. Essentially, a budget document is a policy document. It doesn't look like that all too often. It looks all too often, I've seen, like a spreadsheet. I think it's important, in my experience, to try to demystify the budget as much as possible to residents and to others, because all too often I've experienced a finance department which understands that it's, class 2848 enterprise fund, and they understand that means, but the public itself doesn't understand that. So I think it's important to really reach out to the public, to have budget meetings, and to really break down the budget, to allow the public to see what their tax funds are being used for. And that I think helps in being able to achieve that agreement, to be able to go forward with the development of those plans.
Thank you. Alderman Patagula, I think went back to you then if we were going to get back into the line.
Sure.
Describe your experience with economic development and how that would benefit Minot. How would you make sure that these efforts are well coordinated and managed?
So I've got a pretty extensive experience with economic development, ranging from a much smaller city than Minot, Pleasant Hill, Missouri, to a much larger organization like Clark County. And so I'll just talk a little bit about experiences, if you will, at both ends of the spectrum. I also have experience with an equivalent sized in Marinette County in terms of population. So in Pleasant Hill is a city of about 10,000 people, which is a suburb of, well, it's actually a bedroom community. It's a suburb to a suburb in many ways, of Lee, Summit, and Blue Springs, Missouri. Have a historic downtown, but that downtown has been slowly deteriorating. The entire downtown district I mean, Minot has 103 acres, which is in a historic district, but the entire downtown of Pleasant Hill is a historic district. The problem is most of the buildings are setting, and at most they're being used for storage. What I did was a couple of things. So we started looking at, utilization of TIFs. In the Midwest, TIFs are tax increment financing, not traffic impact fees like it is on the West Coast. Also what in Missouri are called NIDs and TIDs, which are neighborhood improvement districts and traffic improvement districts to allow that. And then also, because I was concerned about what I called this vicious cycle of the empty building cycle, what would happen was many of these buildings people would buy very cheap because the downtown did not have much commercial activity. But they said, well, the city is growing enormously in the residential, very nice homes. So eventually this building I paid $1,000 for is going to be worth a whole bunch of money, but it would just sit there and it became this vicious cycle because the new buildings wouldn't develop. A number of times the buildings were going up for tax sales. So what I did was I reached out to the people who were in the process of losing the building because I wanted to break this cycle with these buildings. Because what would happen is it'd be sold for delinquent taxes on the county courthouse, and then someone else would buy it. Oh, well, this building's going to be worth a lot of money in the future, and then it would sit there, and it was this endless cycle. So what I was able to do is to get them to actually donate the building to the city because they didn't have the money to pay for the outstanding taxes. They would get the tax benefits to that. And then we would sell the building subject to a condition that it had to be used for a purpose to really bring back the economic development in the downtown. And that was very successful. Now, that's at a smaller city. When you look at economic development on a larger scale in Clark County, one of the largest projects that I worked on intensely in Clark County was what's called the 179th Street project. This is over 8,000 acres, which were in what's called a urban holding zoning classification. There's another 12,000 acres surrounding that, which had been sitting unable to be developed. And this was prime land for development because Washington has what's called the Growth Management Act, which I somewhat recharacterize as the Growth Strangulation Act. And it was very, very difficult to have any kind of economic development. The council, however, made it very clear that this was their priority. They wanted this project to go forward. For 13 years, there hadn't been any. When I first started at Clark County, I asked for, okay, what is the financing plans for this 179th Street project? I found a single slide in a PowerPoint presentation which said, we'll apply for some grants and maybe use some road fund. And it required $200 million in improvements. This is infrastructure improvements before you could lift this urban holding classification. You can't phase it either like you can, like the city here is looking to phase in a lot of the flood control improvements. In Washington, you have to have all the financing for these kind of projects for the infrastructure improvements up front. The developers were very frustrated with the lack of being able to go forward with this. Not surprising. They've been waiting for 13 years. So what I did was really worked with the developers, a lot of weekends, a lot of late nights, met with, you had to utilize a lot of the different departments, the Public Works Department, the Community Development Department, and others. I have a legal background, but had to utilize what they call the PA, the prosecuting attorney. They do the civil work in Washington. It's a weird setup. And was able to come up with an agreement to allow this to go forward, to actually do the funding. And that involved, actually, I came up with the idea of increasing the TIF rate, the traffic impact fee, not tax increment financing for that entire district, and was able to get that approved after really 13 years of it just sitting fallow. And it didn't require a tax increase. So that was a very, very major economic development issue, but it was constrained by the Washington Growth Management Act, and you had to structure in such a way that it would survive a challenge, which it did. And so the council voted to approve this. It was actually not challenged by many of the opponents of it, and there are many strong opponents of growth in Washington state, and was able to go forward with that. So I have a lot of economic development experience. It's in a wide variety of different areas, but I think that it's important what I also told the group earlier is what I see is in the Midwest, you see much more focus on economic development. On the West Coast, and I would assume on the East Coast too, there's just the assumption that economic growth will always be there. And that's not always the case. I think you're starting to see that in California. The assumption was California would always grow, but as the cost of housing goes up, the cost of doing business there goes up, you're starting to see that slow down. So I think it's important to continue to focus on that and not to just take for granted that the growth will always come. Growth in and of itself has problems and has costs associated with it. Don't get me wrong, but it's in a much better situation to be in a growing community, which is expanding opportunities, than one that is stagnant or is even losing population.
Minot is currently undertaking several major capital projects that are multi-year projects and multi-billion, million, or billion-dollar projects. How would you ensure that these projects are coordinated and completed on time?
This is one of the things that made me very interested in the Minot position because of my experience as a lobbyist and my legal background. I think that one of the longest term challenges is making sure that the financing for these projects continues to be available to Minot. I know the city was just recently able to use some of the CARES Act money and some of the tobacco settlement money to replace a 20-plus-year-old fire engine. And I think that that's a good thing. My concern is that as Congress has spent more and more money on CARES Act, these longer term projects in the future may not get the funding that is needed, which I think is critically important to Minot. This applies at both the state level and the federal level. So Minot is a community of right at 50,000 people, but we're still the fourth largest size. So there is still that competition with the other large communities in Bismarck with the legislature. At the federal level, it also applies. We have one representative for North Dakota, but thankfully there are 2 senators, and I think it's going to be critical for the city to be able to be effective both in Bismarck and in DC, particularly with the senators, to make sure that some of those longer term financing projects don't get misdirected or used for other purposes, because that is making sure that that is available for the longer term is going to be one of the biggest challenges. There are so many opportunities in Minot, but that is one of the biggest challenges which can really stop the continued growth of Minot in the future. And, you know, really the terrible loss, I mean, you still see the after effects today with the people that had to move and the impact that the floods of 2011 and even earlier have had on the city. So that is one of the things that I think is going to be one of the most important long-term goals. I think that my background as a lobbyist and my experience in those areas are going to be very valuable, particularly because North Dakota has a biennial legislature, so it's going to be just a couple months and it's going to be a short and fast session. I think it would allow me to be pretty effective in representing the interests of Minot to make sure that we're able to go forward, and not only in regards to these flood control projects, for other projects and issues that may come up in the future at both the state and the federal level.
Thank you. The city is also a recipient of $74 million in National Disaster Resilience Funds, designated to build environmental and economic resilience. What has been your experience incorporating resilience and sustainability into an organization and community?
So one of the experiences I also have that I think fits in nicely with mine is the fact that I served as the flood zone administrator in Pleasant Hill. So that money, the phase 1 of the land purchases is largely completed. There will be a phase 2, and that's going to be critical in the future. It's going to, much like it is in looking at some of the flood control projects, is there will be additional costs that come up in the future as you further get into that project. And I think it's going to be important to be able to adjust that plan if necessary in the future. I think that my background and experience as that flood zone administrator and that preparing for that, I mean, I'm not going to be the flood zone administrator here. I'm sure the city has people that are much more competent at calculating, base flood elevation or issuing no rise certificates or anything else. But it does make me more effective in understanding the issues that are faced in terms of that. And I've also got an extensive amount of experience in dealing with the federal government and some of their at times, which can be onerous requirements to receive grant money, but it's a necessary component to make sure that you are able to maintain that funding and to be able to use it to go forward. That was a very strong coup for Minot to be able to get that large of amount of money for that. And I think that that ties in nicely with preparing for that longer term challenge that Minot faces. And I think my background and experience, it also, as I tell some people, before I went to the dark side and went to law school, I used to do GIS also. I'm woefully out of date, but I think that that's a very powerful tool. I think the city has a well-developed GIS system, and I think that technology, while it's not a panacea and won't solve all your problems, it can be a very powerful tool in laying those plans and preparing for the future.
Like many local governments, succession planning and employee retention and recruitment can be a challenge for Minot. What programs have you implemented to help with this?
So I talked earlier about the when I was at Jackson County developing a plan to retain employees by developing a tuition reimbursement plan. That was important. I also was concerned when I was at Jackson County because we didn't have as diverse of a workforce as I'd like to see. So what I did was I made it a point to go out to a number of the local schools and to meet with them to talk about, answer their questions. A lot of the younger students were mystified by what their local government does. And were a little intimidated to applying for positions at that. So what I did was try to go out and recruit and encourage as many people as I could, understanding that, like I said, you're competing with the free market sector, and they were able to pay better. That's why it's very important to establish that work zone, because when you have employees that look forward to coming to work, it makes everyone much more productive, and the retention is much easier. A longer term issue, trying to address the retirement wave, which potentially could be faced by communities, is important, and local governments. One of the things that I think is important is really developing a plan, understanding what you can do in the future to address that. I've seen departments to be decimated by large numbers of the employees retiring very close to one another, and you lose all of that institutional knowledge. So you have to have a plan for that in the longer term to be able to bring new people in. That's a challenge Minot is facing. Any local government is facing, especially when you see and know how many years some people have been in their positions. That means they have a lot of institutional knowledge, and you could end up losing that institutional knowledge very quickly, and that has a devastating impact on your operation. So you got to plan in both the short term. You've got to create an environment that is welcoming. You've got to try to reach out to have as broad of and diverse of a candidate pool as possible. And you've got to plan for the long term for what you're going to do to handle the retirements, which everyone is unfortunately facing nowadays in local government.
Thank you. One of the last questions, we just have two left. As our next city manager, what would you say would be the steepest learning curve related to this position? And what would you do and where would you hit the ground running?
The steepest learning curve would be by far learning the personalities. There are unique aspects to every organization, like I said before. One of the things I used to tell the law clerks who would start at the law firm that I worked at was, you can figure out the law, but figuring out the personalities is the difficult thing and the more much more important thing. So I will have a learning curve in many other areas also because of those unique aspects to every organization. But I find that always the steepest learning curve is understanding the personalities, how they work together, and really trying to, keep open those lines of communication, which again requires understanding those personalities and those preferences. I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Where would you start to hit the ground running?
Oh, hit the ground running, I think what we were talking about before, I think that because of my experience as a lobbyist, my legal background, I actually was able to draft and get past a number of legislative pieces. I think I'd be very effective at representing Minot in the legislature, both in Bismarck as well as hopefully at the federal level. I couldn't be the full-time city lobbyist, but I think it's important to be able to represent the city's interests for the longer term. And I think that I would be able to be very effective in that position very quickly. Lobbying is about developing relationships. But having that background and having the knowledge that I do, I think would allow me to hit the ground running in that area very quickly.
Thank you. And the final question then, I think, is just to look around the dais and see if you have any questions for us.
Sure. Actually, there were several I wanted to. One of the questions I wanted to ask about was the role that historically and the council would like for the city manager to play in regards to the state fair. When I first started in Marinette County, the fair, I did not have much experience with fairs. I saw the dedication of the volunteers, the hard work that they did, and I was very supportive of their efforts. Then when I was in Pleasant Hill, the Cass County Fair was held in Pleasant Hill. It's called the Cass County Fair, but it was entirely ran by the city of Pleasant Hill. So I had a lot of experience with fairs there. Clark County, the fair is an enormous undertaking. I believe it's the 4th or 5th largest in the country. Massive organization. So that's one of my questions is what has historically as the role the city manager played with the fair, and what role would you like for the city manager to play in regards to the fair?
It's a great question, Shawn. I think if we just take a look at the holistic probably difference, the state fair is actually run by the state fair, which is a state entity. And many times we've seen the relationship change over the years between the city and the county and even the state fair organization as it is. We've seen that I think relationships strengthen over the last few years with, I think, more connectivity in terms of how the event can be even more beneficial for both entities. To answer your question, as far as the city manager's role, that likely could be very yet to be determined as far as continuing to build that relationship. And I think that that's where the relationship aspect of building both the economics and the connectivity on, as some folks have talked about, when the state fair is in town, that is the only thing that's going on in town. However, we've also identified I think through the Main Street Initiative, the white paper program through the IEDC, that there's a lot of other activities that can be beneficial for both entities. That is likely where I would see the city side helping to both enable and grow both aspects of it, at least in my opinion. And I would look around the dais if anyone else has anything more to add, at least from that perception right now. Alderman Patagula.
Well, I think couple things. First of all, the state fair is in the county,
sure,
jurisdictionally. I believe one of the buildings is half county, half city. So there are issues in terms of what services we provide or don't provide. I think the fair is clearly a driver of economic activity in the city and the region. Unfortunately, we don't get any sales tax benefits from sales at the fair. It's a tremendously large facility that isn't used nearly as much or as often as it could be or should be, and that's part of the challenge. There's a tremendous infrastructure there that, return on investment is sporadic. It's not too many weddings that need a hall that fits 10,000 people.
Right.
So I think some creativity there is important. I mean, I think everybody in the rural and the urban areas agrees on the importance of the state fair, and it's a jewel, a diamond that's still in the rough, and I'm not sure we've figured out how to get full benefit from it. So I think that's one of those things about the community that we really need to think about and see how we can develop further. There's some touchy jurisdictional issues. It's a relief not to have to provide fire protection, police protection to it. But on the other hand, it generates a lot of taxes. So
Sure.
it could generate a lot of tax income.
The indirect revenue from the hotel rooms and everything
Right,
else too. So.
right.
Alderwoman Evans. Okay.
So you talk about if any role you played when, I'm sure there was, because there often is in cities, the tension between the Cowlitz and the community when a casino is being built, and how your role in managing those tensions with the First Nation and perhaps the community and the stakeholders.
So the community was concerned initially about the development of the casino. I think primarily traffic issues. There was some moral opposition to a casino. This was before there were casinos in almost every state. Was when the Cowlitz were first trying to develop this. So when I came into the situation, there was, again, that a long history of animosity, but the tribe had already essentially prevailed. Well, they had prevailed in regards to being able to build a casino, and it invested an enormous amount of money. So what I did was really to reach out to them and to say, listen, you know, there is this past, but I wasn't a part of it. I want to reach out to you. I want to talk with you. I want to work with you as much as I can. There was some resistance at first, I think, from the tribe, because again, you're trying to overcome many years of being at loggerheads from a legal aspect. I think it's important to constantly work on that relationship. Was able to work with them in a number of areas that they needed some county support. And again, to try to work to draft some agreements that would benefit not only them, but also the county, in terms of that way they wouldn't have to provide for these additional services. So in that regards, it was a win-win for both. You can't always do that, but even if you can't get a win-win, at least you can have an open line of communication. And I think that they very much appreciated that. I came into it with an open mind. You know, I think it's very important because you're setting that tone. You know, I always went to them. I thought it was important and to say, you know, listen, I'm just here to learn what your goals and objectives and concerns are. And again, to set that tone, not only with them, but with any group that, you know, maybe has a disagreement or anything else. I can't promise you that I'll be able to get a remedy. I stepped into a buzzsaw in Clark County in regards to quarry operations. The quarries have been operating for a long time. Clark County is growing enormously. You have to have the rock. Guess what? The rock is at the top of a mountain. People are building very expensive houses on the mountain, and these very heavy trucks are going down the mountain when school buses are there. They have legitimate concerns. So one of the things that I did in regards to that was able to work closely with a community development director, formed a group to really get the two groups to talk to one another. I didn't expect one side, i.e. the mine operators, or the other side, the quarry opponents, to all of a sudden say, yeah, I changed my mind and take an opposite opinion. I didn't expect that, and it didn't happen. But we were able to structure it in such a way that they at least had lines of communication. We're able to correct some of the incorrect information that gets leaked out there. Shockingly enough, some information on social media is not correct. So that's just another example of a very contentious thing that, again, neither side agreed. I came to it. The agreements had expired with the quarries. I thought it was very important from a legal perspective that if the council made the policy decisions they did, they wanted to continue with the quarries, but I wanted to respect the concerns of the neighbors. So we drafted a new agreement which restricted the hours of operation, reclassified the total number of trips and everything else. Neither side was completely happy. And I believe in that case, that is the best result, because it addressed some of the concerns, which I think were legitimate concerns, but it allowed the rock extraction to continue, which was critically needed within Clark County and was a policy priority for the council.
Any final follow-up question?
I guess I only got a couple more minutes, but one of the things that I'm very proud of was starting the CASA program in Marinette County and a drug court there. And I know that Minot has a drug court already. North Dakota is actually the only state which doesn't have a CASA program. CASA is for court appointed special advocate. There are children advocate centers here in Minot, and there may not be a need for a CASA program, but one of the things that if the council is interested, I don't know if there is looking to just meeting with the children's advocate centers. I think the CASA program is a wonderful program, and was able to support the creation of it and was able to get it self-funded after 2 years. It may not be needed because we may have adequate child advocacy centers here, but I just wanted to ask if there was any thoughts on that from the council, because those are two things. The drug court particularly, we had a very severe heroin problem in Marinette County. It was this endless cycle again. The costs for incarcerating the people were sky high. The social costs for the petty thefts and everything else were immeasurable. So the drug court gave them some structure, which was very important. And there were some that didn't succeed, but many others did succeed. And it truly was, I think, one of the most satisfying things I've been able to be involved in government was to see those programs, to see that difference. And that's the reason why I chose to go in this career, because you get that level of satisfaction, which candidly I didn't always get working in a law office or as a lobbyist.
So we do have guardian ad litems.
Sure.
That is run out of an organization out of Bismarck, a nonprofit that hires and retains all of the guardian ad litems in this. So, I mean, that would be the organization to start with, but they are in every courtroom.
Sure.
You know, in the state, basically, just working out of our major cities, and have really improved the advocacy in courtrooms for our kids who are impacted by the opioid, just any kind of thing where they have their own voice in the courtroom.
Right. And that's what, I mean, like I said, it may be the city is being able to effectively represent it right now. It's just something that I'd like to look at, because I think it is, I just saw the impact these poor children that are awash in the court system, you know, if their parents are being incarcerated or charged or something like that. And there really was, they need somebody to advocate for them, whatever the structure is.
Right.
So.
Thank you. Final question?
I guess I would ask if there's any other questions or any areas that you may feel like you need more information from me about. I'd be more than happy to try to answer them. I would like to just thank all of you and all of the viewers out there, wherever they may be in the camera. I don't know which camera I'm on. I've really enjoyed my opportunity to be in Minot. It's a wonderful opportunity, a wonderful experience, and I just like to thank both the council as well as everyone else for this opportunity. So.
Thanks, Shawn. Seeing none, I do again want to thank you for the opportunity. And as I made a little joke yesterday, we have the best weather that we ever hoped for.
I saw what it's going to be in like 5 days, though. So.
That will.
Yeah, when you have days like this, I learned that in Marinette. You learn to really appreciate when you get days like this in November. So.
Well, you can enjoy a taste of a warm fall while you're here in Minot. So thank you, Shawn.
Thank you.
That is the end of our interviews this morning for the Minot City Council with our three different candidates. Again, the council staff for also all of the work that went into this, as well as our city PIO, and of course the candidates for coming out here. Ms. Stevens, for the work that went into this. We appreciate that. And, for the folks that are watching, maybe just one last time, if I could bring you forward for the process moving forward, and then we'll wrap from there.
Yes, thank you. So you have completed the interview process. The department director panel, they're in the process of completing. They had a little bit of a power outage that, so they're still conducting an interview downstairs. And the candidates have kind of completed all of their activities. So you'll have an opportunity here to perhaps have a little discussion if you wish to do so, or certainly if you need additional information from me, now would be that would be a good time to ask for that as well. And as has been stated, there's an opportunity here for the public to continue to comment. You have the public videos that are available on your website, and citizens can continue to view those, as well as any city council members who perhaps were not available to participate in the meet and greet last evening, and of course review these interviews as well. And then we'll gather that feedback for you. I'll be working with your HR director on that, and then we'll be setting a time perhaps next week or in the coming weeks for you to have some further discussion and to determine if there is a preferred candidate here. And then if there is, to then go forward and perhaps negotiate an offer with that candidate.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. Does anyone from the council have any questions? Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you again, Shawn.
Thank you.
Is there any further discussion that we need today before we, I think, take all of our information that we've written down? We do have our feedback forms that I think we should all take time to go through and fill those out for ourselves, and planning for that likely meeting ahead. And I would assume that we're going to get some of that feedback from the stakeholders from their meetings to be disseminated to all of the council for our review. And then we will look forward to, and if we do have any further questions, certainly we'll reach out to you and then have that sent out to the appropriate candidate or candidates if there are any further questions. So seeing none, again, I want to thank everybody for all of the work, especially the candidates coming in. What I did not mention, this is the first time that this has ever been conducted this way. It is a much more public and open discussion, and I know sometimes that puts a little more undue pressure on the candidates, which can either be good or not so good, but I think it is beneficial in this case, despite all of the COVID challenges. I think it worked out very well. So thank you to everyone, and we'll be talking very soon. Thanks.